So thank you very much for inviting me. Really sorry I cannot be there. I was teaching this morning and I cannot escape. So I'm just going to give a talk today about some of the work we have done on how sensorimotor expertise influences aesthetic and emotion perception. And I know, I mean, I'm very sorry to miss the meeting this morning. I know you had Julia there as well and Vasiliki later, and I have worked with both of them. So you will see a little bit of our work together as well. But basically, the essence for today's talk, I have divided in 3 parts. I want to talk very briefly of how expertise influences perception per se, how expertise modulates embodied aesthetics, and how expertise influences visual and emotion sensitivity. The first part is very brief, and you will be all very familiar with. It's just want to recap how does the brain process dance. And if you all remember the classical mirror neuron theory, when we observe a movement or a dance movement, I will be internally simulating that action inside my head. I am not a ballet dancer myself, therefore my internal simulation will look a little bit like the one you see on the screen here. However, if you are an expert dancer, like Carlos Acosta or Tamara Rojo, then your internal simulation will be much sharper. And this is exactly what we tested in the first study that we did, combining dance and neuroscience, where we had professional dancers in the scanner, and we were looking at the brain activations while they were watching dance movements they were familiar with, but also other movements similarly complex that they were not familiar with. And at the same time,
I think we lost Bea again, right?
as a capoeira, observe capoeira movements. So you saw yesterday Emily Crosstalk and Guido have a lot of work here on the same. And there are many, many, many other studies that have been happening that support this idea that we bring back our motor memories and our motor experience during perception. And when we work a lot with dance, on top of this idea, we could not escape the concept of preference and liking. And we also developed another study together with Corinne Yola, where we asked the participants about their preference on dance movements, which ones they like more or they like less, and then we see which brain areas respond more strongly to preferred movements. And we found that there are these areas in the premotor cortex as well that seems to have a stronger activation when you watch movements that you prefer, that you like more. Then we can say that there is a strong connection between the level of the sensorimotor response, this activation here, and the intensity of your liking, or the other way around. Maybe the intensity of your liking or your preference is modulating the intensity of the sensorimotor response. In fact, we cannot disentangle which one goes first, but we know that there is a relationship between them, a connection between the internal motor resonance and liking. And this idea brings together the concept of internal resonance and embodiment, and put together the idea of embodiment with aesthetics. And I'm going to talk in my next part about this part, expertise and embodied aesthetics. Embodied aesthetics, and I want to make a little pause here, is not a concept that neuroscience has developed. It comes from cognitive science and philosophy of mind, and basically say that there is a strong role of the body in shaping the mind, in shaping perception. So when we, for example, look at artwork, and this idea was developed by Friedberg and Sorry, I lost my connection again for a second, and I realized, I think I was in this slide, but basically I was saying that when we see artwork that has a body.
Beatriz, I'm just going to stop you for a second. Do you want to maybe switch your camera off in case that's killing your bandwidth? I will miss your beautiful pink jacket, but
I think it's universe. I don't think it will help. I can do that and see if it doesn't go.
okay.
Let me see. Yeah. Yeah, let's where I'm here. Okay, but you still see the slides, right?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Wow, that I haven't had this problem in a very long time. I don't know what's happening. I'm sorry. I take my video out again and try to continue. But I moved from a slide. I'm tired of saying this. So I moved to the next slide that I was saying that we embody many aspects of the art, right? But when we observe dance, there is a direct correspondence between what I'm observing, that is a dancer that has a body and the internal representations of that body that I have on my brain. And this direct correspondence, we think that should be evident at many different levels. And this is a representation of the classical sensory and motor representations of our body in our brain, but we have many other representations. But I will come to this representation a bit later on. So this is what we want to study, this direct correspondence between the art that I'm watching, that is a dancer with a body, and the body representations in my head. So we can do this on dance. But what is dance? I normally investigate a very simple form of dance. And I've been told that dance is not just a body and a bit of movement. It has a context, it's normally performed in a different space. It's often accompanied by music, and it's often performed by not only one dancer, but multiple dancers. So we have observers that they are experienced and non-experienced, and this is a lot of things to process. So there are two ways of doing that. We can either create a bit more ecological stimuli, because I understand that what I have been using is not very ecological, but at the same time, with my hat of a neuroscientist, I think that action is a very complex stimuli. So I decided to go initially for a way of decomposing the dance so I can understand how each component is being processed. And I like this quote of Yeats that say, how can we know the dancer from the dance? So we can't when we see dance. So in order to decompose a couple of aspects of dance, we have done some studies where we look at only at the body processing, and we remove the movement, and we have other, and now I don't have my pointer here, and then we have other studies. What we have done is we have removed the body from the movement using point light display. So like that, we can understand in some studies how the brain processes just the body, and in other studies, how the brain processes just the movement. I have chosen a couple of studies that focus on the body. But if you are interested, you can send me an email for other things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this study that we haven't published yet. So in this study, we basically wanted to see how the motor and sensory representation of the brain that we have plays a role when we have to do aesthetic decisions or preference decisions on dance postures. And what we did, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time in explaining the paradigm in the interest of time, but what we did is that we collected electroencephalography while we asked people to do aesthetic tasks on pair of dance postures at the same time that we externally stimulated the hands or the feet to enhance different areas of the somatosensory cortex. And we had aesthetic task and a control task, and we had a group of dance experts and a group of non-experts. And these are maybe details of the methodological, these are details of how the methods work, but here we have an ERP represented the somatosensory regions when participants were doing aesthetic discrimination on congruent stimuli in the aesthetic task, not in the non-aesthetic task. And I haven't explained very much what means congruent or incongruent, but basically it means that the difference between the aesthetic judgments are either on the arms or in the legs, and my external stimulation, the activation I'm enhancing in the somatosensory cortex, is also in the arms or in the legs. So I'm looking for difference between congruent, between my visual stimulation and my somatosensory activation, and incongruent responses. And here I can see a very early response in the aesthetic task, not in the visual control task, but importantly, when we do exactly the same study with experts, we find that experts have a response around the same time, but the pattern of this response is very different. And early response suggests that there is something going on in relation to how we pay attention in performing this particular aesthetic task, but not when we have a control task. And whatever process is going on here is happening in a different way in controls and in dancers. So basically, the same areas that perceive regular bodies and movements, although I haven't shown those studies, are engaged in their aesthetic evaluation. And we have seen sensorimotor aesthetics, embodied aesthetics, and here an effect of expertise on aesthetics as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the last part, and I have a few minutes, so I only want to show here 3 ideas, and that's where the work with Julia, that I think is in the room, and Vasiliki, who will be talking later online as well, come in. And I want to present the idea of expertise in visual sensitivity and emotion sensitivity. When we are experts, we not only develop and acquire different neural mechanisms to perceive the actions, but this is so also in the way of a visual sensitivity. What do I mean? I mean that they see better, they understand different information, and they are able to predict the actions a little bit more. So here I have an example of some studies that we did a few years ago, where we collected videos of point light display of bailarinas. And if you are a very good ballerina from the Royal Ballet, if you're ballerina A and ballerina C, you perform the movement in a very similar way, or you should perform the movement in a very similar way. And let me see if I can play the video. And okay, so I don't know if you, this is ballerina A doing a movement, and this is ballerina B doing the other movement. And we asked basically a group of experts if they could perceive the difference. And what we found is that female ballerinas that they are very familiar with the movement they just have seen. They are very good at doing this task, while control participants that they are non-dancers, they are not very good at doing this task. So there is a level of what we call visual sensitivity. Dancers see more details in the movement that they know. This internal simulation helps seeing more or seeing better. And importantly, this happens only when you see the movement in the orientation you have learned. Because we had several control conditions when the videos were presented upside down, for example, and in that case, the ballerinas were not better. Okay, so this is an example of visual sensitivity, but there are many more, and Valentina actually has done some work as well. There are many more studies showing that better visual sensitivity in other motor experts, such as basketball players and football players, looking at action prediction and other factors. Now, I want to move into emotion sensitivity and expertise. And this is the work that, hello, Julia, that we did with Julia some time ago. And the idea behind the study is that when we have art that shows an emotion, in other ways, in other forms of art, like a sculpture or paintings, we are very good at recognizing the emotion that is being shown. And if I'm an expert performing artist or not an expert like myself, I can actually probably recognize the emotion that is being represented here. However, if the emotion is represented in the form of dance, and this is using a library that Julia created some years ago, we could predict that dancers will be very good at recognizing the emotion, but people like me maybe will be less, or we didn't know. And I'm going to just skip over because I'm sure you have already talked here about Julia this morning. But what we did is that people watched the videos and rated the emotion while we collected galvanic response from the fingertips. So this is electrodermal responses that allow us to measure the conductance during the perception. And what we found is that the control participants, people like me, they didn't show any difference between watching videos with positive or negative balance, but we found a difference in the dancers when they watch the videos in the familiar orientation between watching positive and negative balance. So there was a stronger emotional sensitivity in the dancers than in the controls, not only at the behavioral level or at the physiological level, as we have shown before, but neural level, but at the physiological level, okay? Remember, we are measuring galvanic response. So I basically have covered all of it, and I wanted to just very briefly mention one more study, because we have shown that dance expertise modulates behavior, psychological, neural, affective sensitivity to dance movements. But we have this question here. Is this expertise generalized to other art forms, or it is only specific to dance? So we wanted to see if this emotional sensitivity can be generalized to everyday expressions of emotion, because we are all experts at recognizing emotions in faces. Everybody can tell that this is not a very happy kid, and we are very good in recognizing emotion in faces, and also in faces that they are not real, or even in faces that they are represented as cartoons, so very far away from the human form. So the question is, do dancers process differently everyday expressions of emotion just because they are more sensitive? And what we did is that we did a classical paradigm that we had done before in non-experts, where we presented facial stimuli and participants had to do an emotion task or a control task that was a gender task. And we were measuring the visual and the somatosensory evoked potentials simultaneously using EEG. And the results show, and this is the work that we have done with Vasiliki, and here you have a picture of Vasiliki that you are going to see later. from a few years ago, and we are about to publish this work. We are working on it, but basically what we can see so far is that both controls and dancers saw a sensitivity to the emotion task, what is what you expect and what has been shown in other studies. But interestingly, if you can see, the pattern of this sensitivity is different in the controls and in the dancers. A little bit the same that what happened in the aesthetic task, that they both have a similar response, but the pattern of the activation was different. So I think we can conclude that dancers experts saw a stronger sensitivity to the perceived emotion when they picked a familiar movement, but also they saw some difference when we see everyday expressions of emotion. And this is basically the end of the talk. I think I've tried to show you some examples of the multi-layer effect of expertise. And I guess that maybe for discussion, and it's a pity not to be there because discussion online are very difficult, but one can ask how this expertise has been built and what does it mean to be an expert. We can think that it might be because there is a stronger motor physical training and that enhances sensorimotor representation, or because there is a stronger connection with the body that increases the body awareness, or because there is a strong training in performing arts that use the body to convey the art. So, I mean, I don't know, obviously I'm not a ballet dancer, I'm not a dancer myself, so I'm sure that you are going to have a very interesting discussion over there. But yes, thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. I'm really sorry not to be there and not to see you. I'm going to come back online. And thank you very much to all the collaborators. I'm very sorry not to see in person Julia and Vasiliki, that I know they're also participating there. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave it here.
Thank you so much, Beatriz. You can try and bring out your face back so we can see you. So thank you.
Okay, I'm back.
We hope it stays because we just want to see you and say thank you properly. It was wonderful. I love it when there's this beautiful like story arc, which makes so much sense. I know it maybe doesn't feel that way on the journey, but it looked beautiful.
Yeah.
Are there any questions in the room? There's one from Asaf.
Thank you. I'm curious
Oh,
about.
you are there as well. Oh, I'm so sorry to be there.
One question about the new study with the aesthetic judgment and the other judgment, with the difference between dancers and non-dancers. So my first question, what I'm curious about is that the dancers show a difference in both tasks. I mean, they don't look at they do something else, it seems, right? And so I'm wondering what was the other task, and did you have also stimuli that were not dancers, or like, did you have like upside down dancers or something else in that study?
So in this study, I have a control task that I don't know. I was trying to come back to that. I don't have upside down dancers. I had in a different study upside down dancers. There are a few combinations there, but I have a few control conditions regarding that this design here. That because all my tags appear in all of them, in the aesthetic task and in the control task. But I'm looking at the difference between the congruency between what you see and where you have been touched, that the sensory representation I'm activating. So the response is different in the pattern. I agree with that, but the difference is around the same timing. And this difference is only in the aesthetic task, not in the control task. But yeah, I think interpretation. I haven't finished this paper yet, so interpretation is on the way. It is possible that they are just paying attention. It's an attentionally driven, only that effects are happening at the somatosensory cortex. But of course, it's very early on, so it's attentionally driven.
What was the control? That was like, what did they actually do?
So they had two different. They have the same posters, but they have to judge difference in the visual luminance that we control. Very small difference in the luminance, in the color of the bodies.
Any other questions from the room? I have a quick question, and this is to everybody, I think, who's doing this kind of work. Is I'm interested in dynamic contour, and I think this sort of relates to the talk we had earlier today from Sabine. That I'm interested in these like patterns, right, rather than isolated movements, and I think that that's obviously related to the fact that movement isn't a static thing. And I'd just be curious about. I mean, it's also because I'm a musician, right? And I think that what's so beautiful about dance is how the dynamic contours of what we hear and what we see come together. And I'd be curious to know whether you think that what you train as an expert, dancer or musician, is that you learn to understand this contour actually more than just like an expression, or like if what you're actually tracking is not expression but dynamic contour, which can be a vehicle for expressivity.
You know, I actually think that might be a possibility. I don't think there is a single answer that make the expertise in the dancers experts. So I think that there is probably a contribution of that in combination with all the other factors. So definitely yes. I think what we need is more studies that try to understand each of these potential components independently, so we can dissociate them and see if they have a contribution. Probably the answer is yes. And then see how that contribution interacts with other factors that we know already participate.
Which is something you do so beautifully. Valentina seems to have a hand up. So Valentina, go over to you, and then you can introduce our next speaker.
I think that probably my question links a bit to the one that Merla said. Is probably, I don't know if this is a stupid question, but in a sense, do dancers have to be visually experts to be also emotional experts? So in a sense, is visual sensitivity interact with emotional sensitivity, or do you think they're two different things? And
yeah, I don't know. That's something I would like to explore. And there are some, when the question was not about emotion, what the question was only about internal simulation on motor and visual differences. There are some really nice studies with people training blindfolded, showing that they were both
yeah. I'm referring to the second
important,
study,
but the motor
showing,
is also very important. So I think we need the studies now that dissociate the motor sensitivity and the emotion sensitivity. And maybe all the artists, they have motor skills as well. So artists will not be very good. If you have athletes, for example, they have a strong motor skills like sport players, but they don't maybe use the motor skills to convey emotion so much. What will be interesting is to have the other side, a group that has the emotion but doesn't have the motor skill.
Yeah. In a sense, I was thinking of the very early study from Professor Agliotti on the all the combination of motor expertise and motor expert, and basketball players when you have the visual expertise and the motor expertise and so forth.
You have the journalists, you have a gradient.
Yes, exactly.
So that definitely they all play a role, but I think with emotion expertise it's very difficult to disentangle that from the motor. But I think if we work exploring the arts, I'm sure we can find some group.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe you can explore a little bit, Valentina. I think
well, I started doing the things about something about like understanding interoceptive states of the others, compared to body kinematics, because I think the two things are quite interlinked. So in a sense, how can you understand other like interoceptive states more than emotions without looking into the body kinematics and so forth? So yeah, I think it's a big question anyway. Thank you very much.
What is fantastic, because we've been in this area for 20 years and there's still a lot of questions that can be asked and interesting studies. So
we should think of doing something on that. Thank you very much, Bea. And
thank you, Valentina, and thank you, everybody. I'm really sorry not to be there, but enjoy the rest of the day. I will catch up with the YouTube video and see you online.
You have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.